Part 23. Tiki Motel, 8:42 p.m. If you squinted your eyes and didn't pick out the details, Kyle and Sarah could have been a couple preparing dinner side by side, a heartwarming domestic image. Instead, they were making the old guerrilla mainstay recipe, pipe bombs. They were in the kitchen, beside each other at the small plywood table, which was now covered with utensils and containers. Reese was holding up one of 8 10-inch sections of plumber's pipe. He was pressing the last of the high-explosive putty they had just made into the pipe with a plastic spoon. Leave a little space, like this. Make sure there's none on the threads. Sarah watched him gently scrape off the excess and then thread the end cap on. Screw this on, very gently. He helped her get started. Then, when certain she could complete the pipe bombs without his assistance, Reese went to work on the back door. Sometime later, when Reese had it operational, he came back to the kitchen to help Sarah make the fuses. Street-lit patterns cast by the thin drapes waved gently on the walls. Sarah watched the shadows in the dark room, hoping that the swaying would put her to sleep. But she couldn't sleep, only stare at the ceiling. Reese was an unmoving silhouette at the window, squatting where he could see out the slit between the drape and the wall. He might have been a statue entitled Vigil. Stripped to the waist, his body looked lean and hard in the stark streetlight, the raised scars like insignia. Sarah shifted her gaze to the table. The completed bombs lay neatly in a row next to a nylon bag, which had already been stuffed with a lighter, some packages of food, and various other incidentals for survival on the road. Across the way, sitting in a chair by the window, was Reese. She got up and walked over to him. He looked at her only briefly as she sat beside him on the arm of the chair, then went back to peering out the window, watching, his .38 in his lap. At Sarah's unwavering insistence, Reese had bathed. His face stubble was gone, showing smooth pink skin, his hair clean and damp. He was wearing the new jeans he had purchased earlier, and tennis shoes. Across his naked back, ragged scars marred the flat expanse of tensed muscle. It was like a road map of agony, and Sarah was filled with a sense of futile doom. Flesh was no match for machine. "Do you think he'll find us?" she asked. "Probably," Reese said. "Look at me, I'm shaking. Some legend, huh? You must be pretty disappointed." Reese let the shade go and faced her. She was wearing no makeup. Her hair was tangled. Her lower lip quivered. "I'm not disappointed," he said, in as neutral a voice as he could. Sarah looked at his eyes, looked away. She knew how she must compare to the image of her he had brought with him. She was sure that even the lowliest female scavengers in his world were better suited to survival than she was. "Kyle, the women in your time, what were they like?" Reese shrugged. "Good fighters." "Kyle," she began, then hesitated, realizing that she was looking at a sweet young face, handsome, really, despite his scar. He was her protector, but somehow she sensed Reese needed her. What she was about to ask was something new. It had nothing to do with his duty, or her fear, or their shared nightmare. "In your time, was there someone?" "Someone?" Reese asked, puzzled. "A girl, someone special, you know." "No," he said, too quickly, remembering all the women he had known, especially the ones who had died. It seemed as if they had all died, at least the ones he knew by name. "Never," he added, almost as an afterthought. Sarah paused, surprised. "You mean you never—" Reese turned back to the window, his fingers tightening around the gun involuntarily. "There was little time for that. I was in a war. If they were old enough for that, then they were old enough to fight. They were just other soldiers, nothing more." The grey and endless loneliness of his life struck her then. and the little Sarahs felt the hot wind of outrage and despair. Then something more painful and yet more wonderful than that coming after. Something that twisted them around and made them face a new part of Sarah, so they wept and held each other. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, and impulsively touched a raised, poorly healed slash under his shoulder blade. "So much pain." Tears came out of her then, rolling hot down her cheeks. Tears for him as he sat rigid under her touch, seemingly oblivious to her fingers caressing an old wound. "Pain can be controlled," he was saying, his voice flat. "Pain is a tool. Sometimes, when it is irrelevant, you just disconnect it. But then you feel nothing." Reese held on to John Connor's words. He replayed the briefing over and over at high speed through his memory, clamping down on his emotions, which were boiling over and out of him. He tried to block them, tried to seal the cracks, but the feelings were under enormous pressure, and her fingers felt so soft and good. Sarah felt Reese's muscles ripple under her fingers now, and his breath caught in his throat. Then he spoke very quietly, as if she were a priest and he was giving confession. "John Connor gave me a picture of you once. I never knew why. It was very old, torn. You were young, like you are now. You had a faraway look in your eyes, and you were smiling, just the slightest bit, but somehow it was a sad smile. I always wondered what you were thinking. I memorized every line, every curve." He choked off the last. No way was he going to continue. But he couldn't stop, because now he was blasted open. Everything held inside was spurting through the gaping breach, and his mouth went on, and his voice grew strong with conviction as he said, "Sarah, I came across time for you. I love you. I always have." There now, all said. Now go back inside and cement over the breach, and everything will be fine. But he couldn't find his way back, because he was staring at Sarah's luminous eyes. She was looking at him, in shock, her eyes moist, and he wasn't certain any more of anything. Not his training, not his duty, and especially not her feelings towards him. But he knew that he had loved her, and that nothing would ever come near hurting her again, because he would destroy a world to save her. He would cut himself in two. He would cease to exist so that she might live. Not for mankind now, but for her. Sarah saw all of this on his face and in his eyes, and it was his expression more than his words she believed. What shocked her the most was the revelation that she had, after all, inspired the look. More profoundly and painfully than she ever imagined anyone ever could. Reese was giving her the look, and it was so intense it burned her, but she wasn't going to look away. She wanted him to look at her in that way, forever. And as she wanted that, time began to slow down, and it became very hushed in the small dark room. Sarah touched his face. The skin over his cheekbone was so soft. Suddenly, Reese remembered the way back. It was dark and cold and hard, but it was important that he start towards it now if he ever really loved her. Wrenching himself to his feet, he walked away from her. "I shouldn't have said that," he hissed through clenched teeth. He stood over the table and began methodically packing the pipe bombs into the nylon bag. For a moment, Sarah went weak with disorientation. He was moving like a machine. Like a cyborg, he was hiding in the machine from her. This she could not bear, and she came to him, pulled him around, embraced him, kissed his neck, his cheek, his mouth. The rush of feeling seemed to flow through her arms and mouth into his body and melt his rigidity. Reese knew the way back was lost forever. He let out a soft whimper as a part of him died and another part grew stronger. He pulled Sarah tighter into his arms, crushing her to his chest, and drank from her mouth. Somehow they were on the floor by the table. He couldn't feel it. There was nothing around him but Sarah, and he wanted her and pulled her closer and closer. She was kissing his scars. She was taking away the pain and altering the purpose of his life. She was a thief, and he was a willing victim. She was moving above him now, hovering like a tender antithesis of the aerial HKs, and he reached for her, even though she was already as close as he could get her without crushing her to death. Sarah felt his need rage through his body and resonate all through hers, until she was hungrily devouring him. For a timeless stretch, it was like that, mindless clutching and gasping, without plan, both of them drowning in the first powerful wave of their love. But then Sarah began to emerge and see that he was lost now, undirected, wallowing in confused need for her. She led Rhys to the bed. Once there, she helped him get out of his pants, then guided him over her body, putting his hands on the places that had seemed asleep because they had never truly been awakened. They awoke now to his touch and cried out for release. Soon, both of them were naked, making a new environment of togetherness, an environment that had never been before and would never be again. And now time did stop. They alone beat out a measured thrust of time as their bodies met at the tender, pulsing center of a grim cosmos. Tiki Motel, 11:28 p.m. Sarah opened her eyes and watched the light patterns shifting on the wall. Rhys was asleep next to her, his chest rising and falling with deep satisfaction. His face was so sweet in repose. Thinking back on the whole thing, she realized what a child he was and how much this experience had changed them both. Before they found each other, she had been a waitress locked inside her own insecurities. He had been a child soldier, making only war his life. But now that they had collided and become one, they were both new persons. The solemnity of this thought made her heart almost stop. She rolled to Rhys and held him tightly in her arms. He stirred but did not awake. This was a triumph of sorts. He was safe in her arms. There was an impenetrable bubble around them now, and nothing, not even a Terminator, could break through. She kissed his face gently, and he moaned. He had kept death away, and she was giving him life. They were both teachers. The knowledge was equally important to their survival. Love and war, pleasure and pain, life and death, and endurance, yes. But they were not alone in the universe. Sarah became aware of the noise of civilization outside their door. Traffic, murmurs from the next room, the high whistle of a military jet passing overhead, a dog barking. Endurance was necessary when you were being tailed by an unstoppable machine bent on your destruction. That was the kind of life that lay before them, running from something that would never give up searching, that would keep coming after them until they were both dead. It gave the word relentless an almost physical dimension, the dimensions of a Terminator. She knew that they must change their strategy. Rhys evidently was simply here to prevent the Terminator from killing her, keep her well hidden until the war, and help her emerge with her son, and rally the resistance movement to turn the tide. But how could they survive as long as the Terminator was in the world? Rhys had tried to destroy it before, in Tech Noir. The police had riddled it with bullets, and still it came after them. Now they had the pipe bombs, and they had something more powerful than simple animal cunning. They had a feeling so strong it would fire their will, and perhaps make it possible now to turn around and wait for the Terminator, to prepare a special welcome, and then obliterate the bastard. There must be a way. Rhys would know. She sat up and started to awaken him, but his eyes were already open. He was concentrating on something very far away. "Listen to the dogs," he said, and the tone of his voice sent shivers like icicles through her. She faced the window and heard the distant barking of dogs. 2, then 3. Another howled. They were blocks away, some maybe half a mile away, taking up the alarm from backyards and porches. their body chemistry rubbed raw by what they smelled in the wind. A dog, sensing a world we don't see, could look into a man's eyes and know if what looked back was human. Then the German shepherd chained outside the hotel took up the alarm. Whatever it was, it could not pass canine check, and it was coming towards them. As they lunged for their clothes simultaneously, time rapidly began to speed up. The Terminator walked past the office towards the target, ignoring the snarling creature, restrained only by the snapping chain, lunging at it, each step bristling with increased energy as microprocessor circuits fired up to attack speed. The details of its environment became crystal sharp, and so dense with information that no human brain could have retained it all. The weight of gravity, the texture and temperature of the asphalt, the distances of all objects relative to it, the wind velocity, the ocean of sound washing over its sensors, the movements of heated bodies behind the stucco walls, the exact dimensions and qualities of everything within the Terminator's field of contact were measured, clocked, and entered into the constantly updated equation of motion and mass. They didn't have a chance. The Terminator stood before their door and raised the AR-180. With one snap of its leg, the door caved in, exploding into 3 jagged planks. The machine stepped into the room and sprayed it efficiently with automatic fire. Bullets thudded into the bare table, collapsing it, splunked through the easy chair, geysering chunks of wadding, and found the bed, ravaging it until the smoking carcass of mattress and metal frame could hold no life. The Terminator reloaded, then looked around. An error had been committed. The Terminator's digitalized view of the interior revealed every object in stark relief, every object but the target. Room number double-checked. Option. Reroute. Negative. Scan farther. The cyborg rapidly strode into the room and looked around. It saw the open back door and heard the running footsteps simultaneously. Herb Rossmore had slowed the Bronco and gazed up sleepily at the glowing Tiki Motel sign. He needed to get some sleep before he went out like a light on the freeway and brought himself some divider fence. By mistake, he had turned one apron early and come to a stop in the rear parking lot, facing the back doors of the rooms. Cursing under his breath, he had jammed the stick shift into reverse and was about to release the clutch, when what he saw caused him to stall out the engine. A couple slipped out the back door of one of the rooms and moved quietly but rapidly along the wall. They were both barefoot, and the guy was still shrugging into a long overcoat, with no shirt on underneath. The girl had her jersey on inside out and was carrying a heavy-looking nylon bag. Snapping his head up, the guy spotted Herb and started running barefoot across the lot, right for the Bronco. Herb reacted quickly when he realized what was going to happen next. He slapped the door lock, then grappled with the window crank, desperately trying to get something between himself and this lunatic. But Reese was on him then, ramming his hand through the space between the window and the door and closing iron fingers around Herb's throat. Herb battled ineffectually at Reese's arm, then acquiesced when he saw the pistol in the other hand. He unlocked the door. There was the sound of a loud crash from the far side of the building, followed quickly by the stuttering cracks of the Terminator's AR-180. "Sarah!" Reese screamed as he flung Herb to the pavement. She was on the other side of the Bronco, already piling in, terror distorting her face. Reese clicked the key in the ignition just as the Terminator strode through the door. Herb had only a moment to roll out of the way as the madman in his vehicle churned the V8 engine to a high whine and dropped the clutch. Herb heard the crunch of metal with confused disdain as the Bronco struck something head-on and mashed it against the hotel building. It was a man. Horrified, Herb cowered as his Bronco screamed with burning tires and lurched backwards out of the parking lot. It spun in a circle and growled mechanically as it crunched into first gear, then roared off into the night. That was pretty bad, Herb thought. But what was worse stood up nearby. The big man, who had been flattened against the building, who should have been dead, quickly retrieved the dropped weapon, noted the direction in which the Bronco had headed, then turned and fled through the ruined back door. A moment later, Herb heard a motorcycle explode into high revs. 2 seconds later, he saw it being wheeled down the sidewalk at the end of the motel. It tore off down the street, after the stolen Bronco. As Herb stood on trembling legs, he was overcome with one single sane conclusion in a whirl of chaotic thoughts. He wasn't going to get his Bronco back. And he was right.